Last class, we started talking about leadership styles, and I gave sort of this long, involved explanation that maybe wasn't done as well as it could. And just thinking about it this afternoon, I was saying that when someone's in the pulpit or you're under a leader, that we don't, in our eyes, when we look at people, we don't separate out body, soul, and spirit. It's all like one package, one bundle together. And that there's certain parts of every one of us, some of it is just natural or human, and some of it is really God moving in us. And so you can look at a person at the 90% awesome from God part of a person, but you don't have to apply that to the 10% of that person that maybe is not so awesome and not so edifying. You don't have to be bothered by that. You can set that aside, not like try and sort that out in your mind. Or you can look at the 10% of a person that's not so awesome and toss that aside, but you're not going to apply that mindset to the 90% that is awesome. So I don't want you to, does that make sense? I'm going to stop right there, otherwise I start going down the road I went down last week and it just gets overly involved. So when we're talking about leadership styles, it is really for that reason, just to really emphasize and teach you that just different men, different women in leadership roles will have different ways of doing things. And those ways of doing things are not right and they're not wrong, they just are. And you could be doing, maybe have what we consider to be a very good leadership style, but that could be done in the flesh, in natural strength, and have no eternal fruit, but maybe be very impressive. And then you could have something that's being done in a maybe a not such a beneficial leadership style, but because the Spirit of God is in that individual, that God is moving, and God continues to bless and breathe on that church and breathe on the people in it, even though maybe things could be done better. And I'm hoping that as all of us have a certain amount of life experience in the church, maybe in employment situations in our families, that our eyes can be open to these things so that it doesn't quite bother us so much. Maybe when things aren't going well a certain way, we can say, okay, that's this person's leadership style. It's not kind of my favorite, or I wish it were a little bit different, but I can live with that, and it's not going to stop the work of the church. We can go forward. I think maybe I've told you, maybe I haven't, that there's a certain portion of marriage counseling that I do, pre-marriage counseling, and I'm the sort of the last link in the chain, and I talk about financial matters as they relate to a family and a husband and wife. And I had a couple in this morning, and I was just talking about certain things and making a certain point, and one part of the couple said, "Oh yeah, we're not going to do it that way. I grew up in a home where it was that way, and I don't want to do it that way." And I think that's, you're going through life learning those things. The leaders that you're under, you may see things, hey, I think I'm going to try it a little bit different. Okay, maybe someday you'll be teaching this class, and there's certain things that you've learned from Pastor Taggart that are helpful, other things that maybe I don't want to do it that way. I want to do it a little bit different in the class I teach. So I'm just encouraging you to have critical thinking, not a critical spirit, but critical thinking, and I think that is part of one of the joys of life, is that we can sit down, we can think with God, and just the further I go, it's just more and more of a joy to me, and sit and think with God about things, about the Bible, but also about other things. I know we've talked about Chad being in our music department, and I think sometimes when you're like working on a song or something, I'm not saying it's like, an angel comes to you and tells you what to do, but you're like before God, I could do it this way, I could do it that way, and it's like you have that sort of interaction, and it's just awesome, because God is interested in the details. He's not just interested in all that's in the Bible, He's interested in other things. Also, how do I dress? Does it edify? And on it goes. And this is, kind of what this course is about, to dignify or to help us think about some things that are not necessarily found in the Bible, but still very important in practical life. So last week we started talking about leadership style, and we said that there were three different aspects that we want to talk about as it relates to leadership style. And that these aspects I sort of present as what I call a spectrum, okay? And let me just draw, it sort of comes out as a line like that. Actually, maybe it comes to an end there. But last week we spoke, we talked about how definition is arrived at. Definition, or how decisions are made, okay? And I'm not so much looking for you to know a specific vocabulary as I am for you to understand a concept. Okay, so I want you pondering and meditating, not just memorizing definition. And we also said that the reason why we draw it as a spectrum is because no one operates at this end totally, and nobody operates at this end totally. But people operating in the middle, and maybe some person, the pendulum is to the left a little bit, some person, the pendulum is more to the right. And you just want to understand that and observe it. Okay, so we talked about definition and decisions last week. Now, there's two more leadership aspects that we wanted to talk about. And here we go. So this, in total, I'm looking for you to be able to discuss and think about 3 different, maybe leadership traits and how they can be, sort of played out. So the next one we want to look at is what I'm going to call how much the leader wants to get involved in detail. Okay? And on one end, you might have someone who wants to get involved, have his hands in a lot of the details. We might call that person a micro manager. In some circles, that has sort of a bad connotation, and I understand that, and I've seen it, and I've done it. I understand that. And then on the other hand, you might have on the other side of that spectrum, you might have a person who is hands off, and you might have a person who prides himself on being a delegator. Okay, and as we said last week, each of these different ways of doing things has strengths and it has weaknesses, has good points and has bad points. And you can almost look at every good point, you can look at that in the mirror and it can become a bad point, So how do we think about this? I think most of us, as we're leaders, would like to see ourselves over on this side. Like we like to think of ourselves as delegators, and if we delegate, what are the advantages of delegation? Well, one advantage of delegation might be it's a better use of my time. Okay? I hand off responsibility to other people and I don't become... Can you read that? I'm sorry about that. Maybe someone can help you. I got that real small. It's a better use of my time, okay? And so that might be the first thing you would think about. And then the second thing you might think about in terms of delegation or turning responsibility over to somebody else is that it can be very effective in terms of raising up leaders, because you're giving people practical responsibility and a little bit of rope, and they can exercise it. I'm sorry, my handwriting's terrible tonight. And the third thing it might be is it might be sort of with the same idea of raising up leaders, but maybe a little bit different aspect of that. It might be very edifying to the person who is being entrusted with responsibility. It's like, wow, you would let me do that? You're kidding me. Remember when I came to Bible college for the first time and they were sending us out on blitzes with tracts? It was like, you're kidding me. You're trusting me to go out with this message and representing you. I was like, oh my gosh, this is like amazing. and you go out there and you make your mistakes and you learn, and it builds you up in the faith. Okay? Now, in terms of being more involved with the details, maybe micromanager, we don't want to use that word because it has bad connotation, but being closer to detail. Okay, over on that side, detail, sort of spelt that right. A way to think about that, what's one of the benefits of being more closely involved with the details, is that the details come out how I want them. Okay? I'm a leader. I'm responsible for my department. I could delegate off to somebody, and it might not come out in a way that represents me very well, or the way I want to be represented. Okay? Now we talked about raising up leaders here. The other side of that would be that maybe I've got a person working for me who is not so much of a leader, doesn't want to be raised up, doesn't have that gift, wants definition, really just wants to. There's people, many of them, who are just worker bees. I don't want to think too much about that stuff. And Taya, you see it in our office meetings sometimes. Some people just have more to contribute than others. Some people are just waiting for the decision. Great, I got that decision. I can go and do that. But in terms of being involved with the decision, they don't have a whole lot to say. There's certain meetings that I'm in where I'm just not going to contribute anything because I really have nothing to contribute. There's certain gifts that I think I have and things I can really help you with, but other things I really have no opinion. I think maybe I gave this as an example, but when we used to have just the 10:30 a.m. service, and we were talking up, we're going to have 2 services. So we went to 8:30 and 10:30, and then we were talking about maybe moving it so the services would be more balanced. I would sit in those meetings, and I'd just be saying to myself, you know what, I have an opinion here, but it's just my opinion. I don't think it's going to, I'm not here to tell Pastor Charlotte how to run the church. If I really felt one was better than the other, but I had no idea. I had no clue. I'd never built a church. I'd never pastored people on that level, so I kept out of that. Didn't have a whole lot to say, So if I am more closer to the details, I get the details the way I want them. Number 2, I'm sorry, this is not like the highest tech terminology here, but it's better for my worker bees, okay? They like that better. Keeps them from being confused and troubled by being asked to make a decision they don't want to make. And then another related to details coming out how I want them, but being closer to the details, I can keep my staff, individuals on my staff, from being raised up too quickly, right? In a way that would damage them, right? The Bible says don't lay hands on people too quickly. And once you've given people rope and leeway and you've given them a responsibility, to step in and take it back is not easy. You've given someone responsibility, they haven't handled it or juggled it so well, so now you got to go to them and maybe creatively take it back from them, but it's going to, maybe you got to tell them, hey, it didn't quite go so well, I can't quite, I gave you trust, but you turned out to be untrustworthy, I'm taking it back from you. That's not an easy message to deliver. And you'll find, so, if you're closer to the details, you can keep yourself out of that situation. So I think what you're seeing here is maybe this is best thought of as a balance, to find the right place you want to be with the people that you have and the people that God has given you on your staff. How mature are they? How old are they? What are their gifts? What's their experience? and giving them the room that they need to grow, but not giving them too much room. And then I want to talk about this one in particular here, details coming out how I want them. And this is, I want to make an important point here, is that, so here I am as a leader in some capacity, and there's details that I could delegate off to somebody. And maybe the details are really, in the kingdom and plan of God, they are really not that important. Okay? It's not like a crucial, important thing in the plan of God. But if I give these details off to somebody, it may come out in a way that I don't really want it to come out. And knowing my temperament, even though that detail in terms of the body and God is not that important, knowing my own personal temperament, I know that if it comes out a different way, it will bother me. You know, I know my own self, you know, and I'm going to minister to myself by not putting myself in that situation. Okay? What might be an example of that? Well, I'm not saying this is a good or bad example, but maybe it is appropriate. It's like in the office, the space that I inhabit, 40 hours a week, I picked out the colors for that office. I didn't bring in the church decorating staff, and we have one, because I just know what I want, and I'm in that room. I know what will, minister to me, and I just I went out and chose the colors I wanted. The church bought the paint. Thank God for the church buying the paint. And then I actually painted the office. My wife and I painted the office myself because it was to my own taste. I didn't feel like I could ask Scott's crew to come in and paint it. And you know what? I am happy in there. I have it the way I want it, And when the church decorating staff walks in, I don't know what they're thinking. But if I had let them do it, it would have come out in a way that it would just like bummed me out, okay? But you can really expand this a little bit. And I might say this a little bit too extremely, but just while we're on the subject, when you're in that seat, you're in charge of something, you need to create around you a life that you can live, okay? Don't be idealistic. What might an example of idealism be? Is that you got a person over here, great individual, godly, gifted, capable, available, but this person has maybe a certain temperament or a certain personality trait that just like irritates me. You know what I'm saying? I mean, and I know if I put them in a chair where I'm interacting with them a lot during the week, that irritation may be such that I am actually hindered. So I just make a decision, you know what, that person's great, God bless them. I'm just not going to put them in that chair, I know in my office, and we'll talk about this as we go a little bit further on down, but, my office tends to be production-oriented as opposed to, fellowship-oriented, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But people who are highly social, okay, that tends to dominate, and if they have a choice between working and socializing, I just don't want that I don't want to have to deal with it. I don't like correcting people, to be very honest with you. I'm not a person who enjoys having to steer and guide people. So I'm going to find people who are self-motivating, self-managing as much as I can, and I'm going to put them in my office, because I don't enjoy hand-holding, and I can be, I'm a typical, maybe not typical man, but I'm one of these guys that I want people to be able to read my mind, but people are not mind readers. So I have to be able to give a limited amount of definition, and hopefully people can run with it and figure out how that goes. So this is what I'm saying, like with details, I'm not saying it's wrong to micromanage. I'm telling you the upside of it and the downside of it. In my office, I absolutely micromanage processes. Once the process is in place, I step back. But I want to personally approve many of the processes that we do, because in my office, what we handle in my office is like the integrity of my staff, my personal integrity, the integrity of Pastor Lange, Pastor Schaller, the trustees and elders is very much at stake in how we handle these details. And if money gets spent the wrong way or gets mishandled, a small thing can become devastating for an organization. So I say this, it sounds like it's proud. I don't think it's proud. I think it's the way I do my job, is that every penny of spending that goes out of this building is personally approved at some point in the chain by yours truly, okay? And there's one department I'm still working with a little bit because I haven't quite wrapped my arms around it, haven't been on the job for 7 years, but we're going to get it there, and we're just going through the process, and people are going to have stuff taken off their desks as they've had, and that's the way it's going to be, because that's the way I'm going to do. I've chosen to do my job, and that's, I think, it necessary. I'm not saying you have to do it that way, but certain things you have convictions about. If you delegate it off and the person doesn't do it that way, you might find yourself unhappy. So you got to know who you are. And then raising up leaders versus just knowing who the worker bees are. I have had over the years, and I've grown out of this kind of like the hard way, but I used to assume that everybody I was working with was like me and would want as much responsibility as they could possibly be handed. I used to think everybody was like that. And so I was always, giving people, extra and giving them rope, and then getting unhappy with them when they did not come through. It's like, this is a problem. What's the matter with you? Why aren't you, how come, what's going on here? Because I did not understand human nature and temperament, But over time, I've learned, that not everybody is like that, and you can't make people be someone they're not. And I just, we'll get to that a little bit more, maybe in the next, when we go to the next, don't want to call it a slide here, but in terms of detail, hands-on versus hands-off, I want you to know some of the ups and downs of this. Now, does anybody, you don't have to, but does anybody here have in their mind an experience you've had where you were either supervised by somebody or supervising somebody and maybe the mark was missed, they gave you too much or too little, When I was early 20s, I was working in a restaurant. I was probably maybe 23 years old. And this first place I worked, and because I'm, whoever I am, they made me into the dining room manager, And I was very glad to take on the responsibility, but because I was young and immature, I totally remember it. A lady who'd been working in the restaurant for some time. She was, my age or a little bit older, but she was, more experienced in that specific place. She, we were doing some banquet, serving soup or something, and she said, geez, if you serve the soup this way, we'll avoid this problem, And again, being young and foolish, I did it my way, and the problem that she could have spared me from, we had, And so, that type of thing was happening, and, after a few weeks of that, the manager sits, come here, Peter, he put some food out in front of a plate of lasagna or something, and, here, have something to eat, So that's like a great management tool when you got to give someone hard news. And I use it to this day. So if I ever invite you out to lunch, bad news could be on the way. So I sit down with Alan, and he was a good guy, but he says, you know what, I think we're going to have so-and-so. She's got a lot of experience. I think we're going to put her into this role. And I just had to eat that, and it was very, very healthy for me at that age to realize that I wasn't all that, Anybody else have testimonies like that or different from that? Okay, Pastor, and we're going to put the microphone into action here. Whoops, I almost upset the apple cart. There we go.
I have more of a question.
Okay.
I want to ask a question about the pastor when we talk about leaders, specifically about the pastor, whether he can choose between the two and choose to be a micromanager or macro manager. Because, and I need some clarification on that, because my understanding is that a pastor's job is clearly cut out for him. He must feed the flock.
Right.
And we look at Moses' father-in-law told him to appoint 70 elders to take care of certain details,
Right.
so that he will be the pastor, hearing from God and communicating to them. So his job was well defined. And then also in Acts chapter 6, the apostle says we will choose 7 deacons who will take care of who gets what, who goes where, who eats what, who sleeps where, so that we will give ourselves continually to prayer and the word of God. So can a pastor be effective if he's a micromanager? And I ask this question because I have seen a pastor do that, and he preaches great messages. He's effective with preaching, but he wants to be in every single detail. He's not a builder, but when builders are building, he wants to be there to supervise, and all the pastors under him must be there at his command.
Right.
So how would you address that?
And just a little aside here. I guess I don't need this so much. Just get that to you. Just so I don't forget to say it, and then I'll get to the question, is that pastor that you're describing, he is going to raise up people like himself, okay? And he will draw people who, I mean, there's certain temperaments, and I say this just because I by experience I know this, just because of the life I've lived in different places, and maybe you do too. But there's some people that really can respond to that type of leadership. It's like, Pastor, just tell me what to do, and that they, in a sense, that's how they understand what honor is. And I don't want to speak down on that. That's just how they know God. It's how they understand honor. Pastor, tell me what to do. And then they'll go out and they'll be the same type of person down to the people under them. Now, here's what I've seen in the course of my career. And I'm going to go back to Pastor Stevens. I remember when we, under Pastor Stevens, that we did the Easter play that we're coming into that season right now. I clearly recall that there were details of that play that Pastor Stevens wanted to be very, very, very close to. And, they'd write the script, and he'd say, yeah, let's change this, and then they'd rewrite it, and then 2 weeks before the play, hey, you know what, I think we ought to do this different. And I think what he had in his mind at that time was he was very aware of the Bible, very aware of how that play was interpreting the Bible, very concerned that we got it exactly right. And I think one year, they didn't even, doctrinally, this is going back decades, or at least 10 years, there was some detail about maybe the Great White Throne or about the Bema Seat that was not even accurate. The two judgments were being mixed up. So in that case, Pastor Stevens, I think because of that point I was making, if he left it alone, it wasn't going to be the way he wanted it. So he felt compelled to jump in there. But to answer your question, I would say, first of all, it depends on the size of your church. Okay? If you are pioneering a work and you've got 5 people or 10 people, you've got to be very, very aware of who these people are. Okay? Who you're putting on your boards. You cannot, we got Pastor Steve Paragala starting the church in West Baltimore. And I'm just, you cannot hand finances over to some guy that's been coming to the church for a month. I mean, you really got to know what you're doing if you do, So the pastor may have knowledge of any number of areas, and he, to ensure, because he just cannot, they're so crucial, he can't let go of them at this point in time until the man or the woman is raised up that has his heart. I like that word and I don't like that phrase, and maybe we'll get to that at some point. But that's an aspect of it. But I totally agree with you. If the man feels like he has to be involved with every detail and everything has to run across his desk, I've told you what has to run across my desk. There's stuff that must run across my desk, and it does. But there's other things that don't, But I think that that man is doing himself most likely, not knowing it, this is on another continent, I have no idea who he's talking about, I'm not close to it, most likely is doing himself a disservice. Can I ask the size of the church? Okay, good enough, big church. So I'm saying in that church, he has men that he is not delegating to that are quite capable of handling delegation. He's preached the message, they have those gifts, he's not raising them up. And furthermore, not knowing that situation, but knowing human nature, those men are frustrated. And they have a conflict in their soul between honor to the pastor and not being able to develop who they are in God. And now correct me if I'm wrong, but most likely I would guess that another aspect of that church is that overseeing pastor will not let people leave his church either. There's subtle pressure on people not to go out and start ministries. Is that true or am I wrong? I could be wrong. And hey, send the mic back over.
He doesn't have that problem. He doesn't really want.
He will let people go.
He will let people go.
Okay, so I give him credit for that. Okay, so people are going, but maybe not trained as the way they could, so they're getting some on the job. So I give him a lot of credit. So because that can be very negative. So that's what I would say about that. Who's in your church? Are they capable of handling the delegation? But yeah, what this whole course is about is the point you're bringing up there, Pastor Ben, is that I believe that there's people in the church who do not have the gift to be an overseeing pastor, and they got to recognize the gift of administration in them and exercise it and be happy with it. And hopefully, if you are an overseeing pastor, you want to recognize his gifts and let people run with it. Someone comes to me and says, Pastor, this wasn't administrated right. It should be done this way. And as long as the Spirit is right, absolutely, let them do it. Let them solve problems for you. And just honestly, based on the interaction we've had in this classroom, there's probably, a number of you that I would look at and say, absolutely gifted administrators at some level. It's awesome, So that's trait number 2. Okay, now, trait number 3, and we touched on this, but I'm going to say it again, is how, what the leadership expects in terms of activity or productivity, okay? So we're just going to call this the expectation of productivity, okay? So on one side, you would have what I would call production-oriented. And on the other side, I'm not quite sure what to call this, but I call it kind of like fellowship or life-oriented. Okay? So on that fellowship or life orientation, I don't care so much what people are doing, as long as they're happy, as long as they're in fellowship, people are filled with the Spirit, they're loving God. As long as people in that department are doing that, I'm happy with that, And then you might have a guy on the other end of it who is very, very interested in production, and what are people accomplishing today? What are your goals today? What are you going to do by 8 hours from now? How will the world be different? I know there's missionary teams out there where team members are required to submit to the overseeing pastor of that team their weekly schedules. Okay? I'm not for it. I'm not against it. It depends on that pastor, how he wants to lead, and it also depends on the people he has. I would imagine there's people on the team that greatly benefit from that level of accountability. And then I'd also imagine there's people on that team that are bothered by that level of accountability because they feel like they're not being trusted. I tend to be, at least the way I'm living these days, I tend to be over on the production-oriented side. Now, why am I that way? It's because I know that the people in this room are working hard, to support yourselves, to pay Bible college tuition. Maybe some of you have other responsibilities. Families, some of you might be working 2 jobs. And we're taking your hard-earned tithe dollars and giving it to people like me, okay? That puts on me a tremendous responsibility. I want my staff working as hard as you are, or else there's something wrong with the equation. That's how I think about it. I'm not saying Pastor Shalom would say that. That's how I think about it. So I tend to attract into my office people who are production-oriented themselves, that they want to be productive. I tend to have workers in my office, Yulia Nosiana is like amazing. She sits at that desk for 8 hours plus a day and just churns the work out. I hand something to Debbie Westera, and it's before I blink, it's back on my desk, done. Pastor, how'd you do that? It's because she did it. I got Taya, very diligent, at Tootie. It's like that. That's what we have. We've had people in years ago, not recent history. I specifically, I don't want you, Angie Haster worked with us, amazing worker. We moved her down to the Learning Center, and she has been, God's gift to the Learning Center down there. But in years past before that, we had, at times, what I would call like we were running an open house all day, where the door is open and there's conversation and friendly people, and whoever walked by would come into my, not my specific office, but into my staff's office, and there'd be laughing and guffawing and fellowship, and it drove me crazy, because I knew that my person was being used up, and I knew that other staff members were being used up, and I would say, what are we paying that person for? To talk to this person? Great. So I got to pay 2 people to have a conversation. That's how my brain goes. Okay? Now, I do not hold myself up as a model. I'm saying this is a spectrum, and you are going to be somewhere in the middle, and my way is not the best way. It's an emphasis, it's an aspect of it. But I'll be very honest with you guys and with the world at large who's watching this thing. It is a struggle for me to go to the staff prayer meeting on Wednesday. I have to literally drag myself away from my desk and go to it out of conviction and on faith, because something feels wrong about getting paid to pray. You know what I'm saying? I just feel like I should be doing that like at 5 a.m. or at midnight or something, but today I got to get work done. And in fact, the pastor came to me and asked me about my department, and we've had those conversations, because people in my department are like me. It's hard for them to rip themselves away from their desks. We do have a lot we have to do, but we got to do it. And so thank God for a pastor that balances me and helps pastor my staff and overrules me in that situation. And it's all, same thing with staff soul winning on Friday. It's like I got to really purpose to do it, because I don't like to leave my desk during business hours. And so everybody understanding this? And I'm going to make another comment on this just because it's coming to me. I think I learned this some time ago. And of course, I have a certain bias because I'm working with paid employees, and I feel accountable for the body that we're working as hard as you guys are, or harder, for the great privilege of being paid to do what we do here. But especially over on the volunteer side, you may, and obviously nobody in this room, I may think I'm like this amazing, like as a young man, I'm like this amazing leader, and I'm going to build a church, and I'm going to disciple people and show them how to work as hard as I work. And some people will respond to that. Some people love that, But there's problems that can go along with that. And we've talked about those before, but those people that work very hard and are working hard because the pastor demands it or asks for it, okay, at some point they got to watch it. Who are you working for, the pastor or for God? And then the pastor lets them down, and then it brings in enmity between them and the pastor because they work so hard and I'm not appreciated, and it can be a very bad syndrome. So you got the person who responds to that. Now, the other thing will happen, you will have a person on your team who simply does not have that temperament, okay? Why are they there? For the fellowship. Team life is about the fellowship, and they come in and you want them working harder. You can beat them, you can preach at them, you can show them from the Bible, you can give them goals, and all you're going to do, you're not going to raise their productivity, you're going to lower their productivity because they're going to start to back off because they simply cannot respond to your leadership. And why would they? Why would they? So I think the best of all possible worlds would be like you've got, the pastor that, you're holding up there, he is laboring in the preaching and teaching and prayer and the Word of God and ministering to people. And that love and that life from God motivates people from heaven to do everything they can for the sake of the body according to their capacity. Pastor Jason Moore is amazing. Very, very productive, very, very relaxed. Very relaxed. I don't know how he does it. I couldn't do it. And I'm not proud of this, I'm not ashamed of it, but I'm just telling you, I need, how do I say it? Well, this is how I say it. Morning, afternoon, or evening. Okay, you get 2 out of 3. You don't get 3. Because once I start giving 3, morning, afternoon, and evening, my life, I cannot sustain that pace. And my evenings, of course, I'm teaching on Monday evenings. I'm home other evenings. Of course, I do have, one daughter at home. And I also have a wife who just needs me around. She's not like this person doesn't need me around, that I need to be there. And so many of my evenings are quiet. And I need that time to, I don't know how to say it, but just to recharge, to go back and throw myself back into it. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it's how it is. I've got like 2 modes, go and stop. And I can't, to find something in between, I end up, going harder than I can go or doing less. So that's my life. And I'm just saying that you got to figure out who you are, what makes you tick, what works. It's not good, it's what's bad. It's just how do we go forward and live a week between me and God and that I can live with. Okay? So that's like very, very important. And I would think that, young pastors, which we all are, please hold that thought. I want to get the question. Don't lose it because because something just came into my mind. But I want to get back to you there, Andy. Young pastors could err on 2 sides. Maybe old pastors could err on 2 sides. Side number 1 would be like overly like, I'm going to build this church. I'm going to whip my people into shape. People are going to respect me because I'm demanding and expect something from them. That would be one extreme, which I think could be an error. And then the other error would be, on the other side, is that people are led by God. Who am I to tell them what to do? I'll pray, and God will lead them, and we'll have a good fellowship, and out of that will come, the body will be giving direction. And there's people that maybe just need direction from you, and they just need to be told. And I tend to err on the mind. I expect people to be mind readers side, and I'll make suggestions or hints. Some people don't get them. Some people are so busy they don't have time to pick up on my hints, And I can get frustrated. Get all as frustrated as you want to that people are not mind readers. Sit down and tell them what you want them to do, and that may solve all sorts of. Oh, we did not know that. I did not know that. My wife, I did not know what you were thinking. And it's like, I grew up in a house where the most important things were not spoken about, It's like, why is that? What's the matter with you? It's like, isn't it obvious? It's like, okay, I guess we don't talk about these things. We just got to imbibe them somehow, And I sometimes people need to hear from you what's behind it, which is why that's the benefit to me with my temperament to have staff meetings on purpose and be forced to download and talk about things and that are very, very important, And, Pastor Schaller, let's learn it all over again. This stuff bears repeating over and over again. Why are we doing this? I left the office today at probably about 2:30ish. I think I'll bring that up again later on this evening because there's something I want to say about that. And I went up to Panera Bread because that's even because of distractions in my home. Sometimes home is not the best place for me to be quiet and prepare for a class because I got people moving around. Those people in my house, what are they doing there? And then I got there's chores to be done, there's things to be fixed, and I'm just there's a refrigerator there, and there's all sorts of stuff. There's, that can distract me, so I'm better off with Panera Bread. But there was an orientation class there, and there were probably half a dozen young people, 16-year-olds, 18-year-olds getting jobs. And I was just totally impressed with, they show this video about the history of the company. They talk about, just different aspects of running a restaurant. They got into, percentages, what percentage is going to food, what's our next highest cost, labor cost is the next highest cost. They went right down the list. That napkin, you put an extra napkin on the tray, but that napkin cost 1/4 of 1 penny. But in the course of the month, we use 40,000 napkins. Oh, no, we make 40,000 sales in the course of a month. So if each one of those sales gets an extra napkin, think about what that's costing. So it's just like amazing. It indoctrinated people into what this restaurant is all about. And it's like, oh my gosh, no one ever did that for me. When I was working, it was just, I'm not saying I had bad leadership. I had some very good people I worked for, but it's just like, do this. Okay, now why do we do this? Well, not talked about so much. So I'm just saying, for me, the discipline of having staff meetings where I actually have to say something and tell people what I'm thinking is like awesome. And I really, just a little bit of a testimony, and why, in one sense, why I'm excited about this course. What we say is a lot of this material we have developed ourselves, and what do I mean by that? I've learned it the hard way. No one taught me to have staff meetings. Years ago I was in a certain situation. This is the way we have to do it, And then later on, reading books and literature, I wasn't the only one to know this. I did it. It worked. It's hard work, but you draw people in, you meet, they understand what you're thinking, they know you're not a bad guy. They know why you're asking them to do this. Now, over time, they start to understand, get on board the team, and people are happier, And it's awesome. But it's like I say, that's what's your question, sir? And send that mic over to Mr. Castro.
So first, I was wondering if we could...
Is that on? Green? Oh,
hello.
Here you go, sir.
So first, I was wondering if we could get some pros and cons for that one. And then secondly.
Yeah.
I was wondering what, when it comes to picking your team, it's obvious that's a big deal if someone gets added or taken away on your team because it's paid staff. Just thinking like with ministry, I'm thinking of a good example. We did campus ministry maybe 3 years ago, college campuses. And we had a good time where there was some guidelines for our team to follow with the ministry. Of course, this is all volunteer, right? You can come and go as you please. There were some guidelines, and they made an exception. And I was the exception, that I was under 18 and allowed to be a part of the maybe 4 years ago.
Yeah.
That I was allowed to be a part of the campus ministry. And then there was someone else that wanted to be a part of the campus ministry, so underage. And it was probably not the best that he was allowed on. Just because of, it was almost predictable.
Right.
But, it wasn't really addressed because it's hard to,
Right.
But, obviously this is volunteer. This is free. This is like part of body life. But, all the same, it's something that can prove difficult later on, like you were saying,
Right.
So, it's kind of tough, having how far, see what I'm saying?
You need to put it into a concise question.
Yeah.
I understand the concepts you're talking about.
Yeah, it's pretty important, you would say, even if it's not paid staff, that your team is going with the flow and it's a part of the program on the same page because of the problems that could occur later on.
Okay. So it's like, I'm not saying this is the exact right word, but like the
Mark
dedication
on the end of it. No,
or commitment, or maybe the training.
Maybe I had too long to think about it. No, I'm just joking.
Training of a volunteer staff. I'm just trying to remember what you're asking. I think I got it, even though I didn't word it right up there.
Sure.
Okay. Here we go. So the pros and cons. this is what I would say. The major of going back to this spectrum of expectation of productivity of a leader. On the production side, you probably will get more production. If you're oriented that way and are motivating people that way, you will get them to do more. The danger is that production fleshly, or is it empowered and motivated by the Holy Spirit? As I've seen it, what you end up with is a smaller and smaller and more productive staff, because people can't keep up the pace and they drop out, you know? And then you end up with, at the end of that process can be you're left with nothing at the end because no one can meet your standards. That's a little bit of an extreme way, but the pro is you get production. The con on that side is that you may drive people beyond their capacity. Now, over on the fellowship or life-oriented side, you, in a sense, over there, you're really keeping the main thing the main thing. It really is all about fellowship and life, you know? It's not about production. But there's something about, I think, human beings, and it's life on earth, and I can't even relate how this will go in heaven, but for us, having a little bit of like tension or drive or stretching us is very healthy for us spiritually, in terms of we are stretched in that stretching to go outside of my comfort zone. I'm going to meet God in that gap there. I'm built up in Christ, so the ministry that I'm taking on and be challenged into is part of my growth and maturity as a believer. And then the fellowship we have around being productive in the right things is like the greatest thing on the face of the earth. I mean, I don't know any more happiness in my life than being on a team where we're doing something. I mean, bus ministry, I loved it. It was great, you know. Again, with people that could be there, not people that were miserable there or going beyond their capacity, but some of the, anybody that you were sort of there in the old days. We up in the Berkshires. In the middle of winter, it'd be dark. We'd be down there at 6 o'clock in the morning. The buses are like frozen into these. We break them out, and I told you about the tires, right? When a bus sits all night, any vehicle, the tires get flat. On the they get, where it's hitting the ground. I'm not saying they run out of air, but there's a flat spot in the tire, And then when the rubber's cold, it's hard. So you start the vehicle up, and that flat spot's like, thump, 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 thump. And then as the tires warm up, they start to smooth out, and that goes away. But it's like, isn't that awesome? I could not be any happier than doing that. You know what I'm saying? Going up in the backwoods of Vermont and farmland and all that stuff and running out of gas. It's just a great life, And but if, where there's no vision, the people perish, so it's just, we're going to put people in a room and they're going to sit around in fellowship. Unless that's moving somewhere, that fellowship is going to turn into not really fellowship after. It's going to turn in, on the one side, the productivity turns into fleshly productivity. Well, the fellowship turns into, it's not fellowship anymore. It's just people sitting around having conversations about comfortable things, So they really go together. You can't separate one out. But that's what I would say are the pros and the cons. Now, the second thing is like, if I get your question, we have a volunteer staff, okay? Now, and then that's something you all have to know, is that my daily experience is, generally speaking, is with a paid staff, and you have to know that biases or affects how I teach things and how I talk about handling people, and the whole overall pendulum of your ministry is going to be probably more on the volunteer side. So you got to be aware of that and just make those adjustments in your mind somehow. But I would say that a motivated, like a volunteer staff, in some ways, your volunteer staff can be more motivated and more dedicated than a paid staff. You got to understand. I mean, there's people who are committed to outreaches out there that are just going to go to those outreaches. That's how I used to do bus ministry, probably 49, 50, maybe 50, 51 weekends a year. I just would not miss it. With my job I have now, I take all my personal days. I get 15 personal days a year. I take them all. Sorry, guys, I do. You know, I don't know if I should or shouldn't, but I do. And it just becomes, it can be a different equation that sometimes can affect people in another way. So if I'm answering your question right, I would say that you are, training, motivating in very much the same way. We said yes to Andy Castro as being an underage volunteer with that campus ministry. And again, I wasn't part of that decision. I don't know the people involved. I don't care. But you can say, you know what? Yeah, we made a decision for Andy, but we're not making it for anybody else. And then as Pastor Lange would say, well, and if the person who's being told no has to ask why, well, he's going to get an answer he doesn't like. Because I'm sorry, Mr. 17-year-old, you just don't have the maturity Andy does, and we don't think it'll work. And in fact, few people do. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So another example could be you have like an outreach area. So it's kind of funny, like you have maybe a team of 5 to 10 typically, and then one of them is really not motivated. And you are like totally loving the others that are motivated and encouraging them. This is all volunteer.
Right.
This is just before
Right.
the Lord. But like you said, volunteers, they can take it very seriously what they're doing.
Right.
And then you have this one person that's not maybe so motivated, and they end up getting discouraged. And this discouragement is somewhat affecting the others around you.
Right.
And it's like, how do you handle a situation like that?
Yeah. I don't know how to handle it. God will give you the wisdom in that situation for that individual. And this is the great freedom we have, is that there's nothing wrong. I mean, if someone's getting discouraged, oh my God, there's a million things you can be doing in this church. There's 1,000 ministries. If this isn't happening for you, go try something else. That's not failure. This is like, everybody here, I don't know, maybe you're not all as crazy as I am, but I tried a million things. It wasn't until I was like in my early 40s that I really felt like I was doing what was appropriate and what I was gifted to do. Did a lot of things before that, did them okay, did some well, better than others, but it wasn't what I was, it wasn't really what I ought to be doing, And so that person can be encouraged to find another ministry. I don't know why the person's discouraged. I don't know what that problem is about, but that's what I would say, and especially if it's affecting the team, at some point. Now the other side of that is like, you don't kick people out of there's church members who come and they're members of our church and they can discourage us, I'm saying, just because of their life. And so you can't boot people out, at least their outlook on their life. We got people like that also. So I don't know if there's an easy answer for it, but the easiest one I come up with is, hey, let's try something else. But also, who's the team leader? Do they know this person? Do they know their gifts? And maybe, hey, I bet if we match this person up with that person, some people have that wisdom to know what those combinations that will work. I generally don't have that wisdom. I don't, but some people do. And, maybe the pastor would have that, because we want to salvage that person. We don't want them to say, I'm a failure at outreach, because it's impossible to be a failure at outreach. That is, the Bible says that is impossible, but this person thinks he is, maybe, so. Any other comments before we end this? I'm glad we went over on that one. Anybody else here before we break? Okay, so let's come back here at, make it 7:26. And then we'll start up on a totally different subject.